Hi, and welcome to Fast Politics today. I am thrilled to be here with New York Times reporter David Fahrenthold, a journalist who has been tracking the actual numbers of Doge and just how the math is not mathing. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
Very excited to have you. So I think of you, I've been reading you forever, since the first Trump term when we were
Yes.
all in our 30s. Actually, maybe you're still in your 30s, but
No, no, I'm
I'm
not. I'm not. I was in my
okay.
30s then, though.
Yes, and me too, and Jesse too. We were all young and we had fast metabolisms and no problems. But one of the things you did, which I always looked to you for, was you were meticulous at looking at numbers and trying to figure out, a lot of Trump world is about like these math problems where 2 plus 3 does not equal 5.
Yeah.
And so one of the things you've done as you've gone to the Times is you have kept this style of reporting where you really are heavy in the data, which I think you could not imagine a moment where being able to analyze and explain data matters more.
Yeah,
And
I
so
agree.
I want you to start by talking about Doge because I still don't understand what they're doing.
Yeah. So the piece of Doge that I've been writing about is this thing called the wall of receipts, where they say,
Right.
here's this, all the great things we've done, all the individual savings we've cataloged. Musk has talked a lot about how, it's so important to be maximally transparent. And so they have this page where they post, here are all the things we've cut, here's how much we saved by them. And it's really the one place you can see them showing their work, right? The rest of
Right.
what Doge is doing is in secret, somewhere else. They've gained access to all this government data. They fired all these people. And it's always sort of like, trust us, we're geniuses. We know
Right.
this data better than everyone else. We're finding things no one else had ever found.
Right.
So this is the one place where you can actually see them at work. And what's striking about it, and it has been since they first put this thing up, is that it's full of errors. And not like, when I see errors, I don't mean like they cut this program and I think that it has value and they shouldn't have cut it. I
Right.
mean, their numbers are wrong, and their
Right.
numbers are wrong in really fundamental ways that show that they don't, or that seem to show they don't really understand the government, even as they're in charge of cutting it. And like that started in the middle of last month when they first posted
Right.
the first version of the wall of receipts. The biggest thing on it, the biggest claim they claim credit for, was
The
they said
8
that,
billion,
yeah,
right?
they said 8 billion by cutting this program at ICE. There was really 8 million, so a factor of 1,000 less. And the thing about that was, like, that's what got me interested in this, because if you knew anything about ICE, you would never have put that number down, because ICE's whole budget is $8 billion. So the idea that they
Right.
gave all their whole budget was one contract was implausible, but that's what their
Right.
site said.
Right. And that is, I mean, I think a lot about like when Elon got going with the NIH grants, he said he was going to cut indirect funding to 15%. Right. Which, if indirect funding were really indirect funding, if the part of the grant that were just meant to be sort of a little extra, that would make sense. But because he didn't understand the way scientific grant writing goes, he didn't understand that the indirect funding can actually be quite large and can support the institutions and the
Mhm.
labs and that the way it's written doesn't necessarily, that's sort of how it goes. The other thing about it is there were also contracts that had been canceled like way before, right?
Yeah, this is another case where it's sort of hard to believe that they did a lot of checking. So, two of the things that they claim credit for were these two contracts that they said each of them was $53 million in savings by canceling them. So, together, more than $100 million in savings. Both Coast Guard contracts for sort of administrative help from a consultant. And all you had to do to figure out there was something wrong was just to click on the link that Doge itself provided. It takes you to this page in the federal contracting system that shows that one of these contracts ended in 2005 and the other one ended in 2006. The company that they were paying doesn't even really exist anymore. It's been bought twice over, changed its name. So you're not saving any money by canceling a contract that has been over since 2005, much less are you saving $50 million each.
Right, exactly. So let's talk about kind of, do they keep adding to the wall of receipts?
They do. They've added, so there's now three sections. There's a section for canceled contracts, and there's a section for canceled leases on real estate. And they just
Right.
added last week a section on canceled grants, basically like in situations where the government had agreed to pay a nonprofit to do some sort of job. So like a contract, but involving a nonprofit.
When it was pointed out that they had made this error, what happened? Because sometimes when confronted with making mistakes, this world tends to double down, or, I mean, what,
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag. They did delete a lot of the errors we notified them about or wrote about. So like of the original list of contracts they canceled, the 5 biggest ones, they deleted all of them because they were all
Right.
wrong. Then the next time around, after they did that, they still posted some errors. So the next time around, they deleted 5 of the top 7. And then, but even now, they put one of the biggest errors back. So the biggest line item on the contracts page or the contracts section of that page, even now, is wrong. They say they saved $1.9 billion by canceling a IRS contract for tech help. But if you look at the contract they cite, it was canceled in November when Joe Biden was president.
Do you have any insight into who does the website, the wall of receipts?
What we've been told is that the agencies themselves sort of send up to Doge, and sometimes there's Doge people at the agency, so
Right.
sometimes it's not a real distinction, but they send to Doge, like, here's a list of things we canceled, contracts we canceled. And then it's Doge's job, and the White House says that does this job to vet these numbers, make sure, and then estimate the savings. They're the ones who go in and figure out, okay, this is how much it was saved from this contract. So
Right.
it does seem like in some cases the agencies send up bogus cuts and the Doge doesn't catch it.
Right.
But in other cases, I can't really tell you where the error comes from.
Right. It doesn't feel like this is a great sign for this group, right? I mean, it doesn't strike me as very efficient, and it also doesn't strike me as very transparent, right? We don't know where the errors are coming from, but the fact that sometimes they're being put back on the site, I mean, that seems like pretty serious.
Well, people write me a lot and say, I think Doge is doing great things. And, are you for waste, basically?
Right.
Do you object to the idea that these guys are finding real things and cutting real wasteful things?
Right.
And what I always write back is to say, like, whether you like Doge or you don't, whether you agree with their work or you don't, everybody wants them to have the right numbers, right? It doesn't serve anyone's interest if they're
Right.
wrong or if they're looking at numbers and not understanding them. Even if you want Doge to do a great job and cut the government, make it really efficient, they got to have the right numbers in front of them or they're not going to make the right
Right.
decision. So I think that's what's crucial here is that, these guys need the right answers and need to have a good grasp of the numbers to make the decisions that even they want to make.
We still don't totally know who's in what agency or what they're technically doing in these agencies, right? I mean, at least publicly.
Yeah, we know little bits here and there. There's been so much coverage done by my colleagues about, Doge people were at this agency or at that agency, and they're accessing this database or that database. But a lot of it is deliberately, we've reported this, deliberately difficult to see. It's hard to know exactly where they are, who's doing what, or even, I mean, you followed this, like who's in charge of Doge. For a while, they
Right.
wouldn't say. Trump says it's Musk. Musk says it's this other person. That part has been sort of deliberately obscure. So yeah, it's really hard to know what they're doing, which is to me why it's so valuable. This one resource they've given to sort of nail down what numbers they're using and how they're thinking. That's why it's so valuable because the rest of it is so murky.
I want to talk about your new reporting, but I first want to talk about this reporting you did on the transition. We don't know who paid for Trump's transition. How unusual is this? Sort of give us the
Yeah. So the transition itself is a nonprofit. It's a nonprofit that this happens in every administration. It's a nonprofit they set up that pays a bunch of people, hires office space, basically gives a paycheck and an office to the people who are trying to get the government up and running. And it's because it's a nonprofit, it doesn't have to disclose its donors. That'll file a Form 990 to the IRS that we'll all see in November. But that'll just list how much money it had and who it paid. It won't list who paid it, who donated to it. Other presidents, they'll have made a point of limiting the people who can donate to Americans. Like foreign nationals can't donate, and also to disclose who their donors were. And just to disclose it usually around now, like a few months after the inauguration, when sort of the transition has closed up its books and ceased operating. And Trump did that the first time. All the other recent presidents have done that. This Trump administration, this Trump transition so far has not done it. We know because some companies volunteered that they donated. We know some of the people, but we don't know the whole picture of those donors.
explain to our listeners why it's important to know who donates to a presidential transition.
Well, this is during the formative period of the presidency when the president is getting all of his advisors together and forming policies and setting the direction for their administration. Somebody's paying the bills, right? And they know who's paying the bills. They certainly know, or they could know, who is funding all of this. And that could have an impact on what they decide to do when they take power, whose interests they decide to support when they take power. And if they know and we don't know, then there is some element of transparency that's lacking there where we can't fully judge their motivations and who owes what to who if we don't know who paid for their paychecks in that period.
Yeah, not very transparent, not very efficient. Tell me about your new reporting.
Well, one of the things that Doge has said all along is that it's going to be maximally transparent. Elon Musk has talked a lot about that. Transparency is key to Doge's work. But last week, after all this reporting, where we pointed out the mistakes they were making in their data, they basically took a step to make it less transparent and make it harder to check the work they do. But they posted a new section on the Wall of Receipts website, 3,400 grants, federal grants they say they've cut. They said that these achieved a savings of $15 billion. But unlike what they had posted before, they didn't say anything about the grants other than the amount of savings that came from them and the agency that had given them. So there was no name of the recipient, there was no tracking number, there was no way to figure out what we had figured out in the past, whether these grants were real, did they really exist, did they really get canceled recently? All this sort of fact checking we've been able to do, they withheld all that information. So there was no way to check their work. So that's not very transparent. But they briefly left clues in the code of their own website. So when they first posted it, they left the ID numbers for all these grants hidden in the code, the HTML code of their website.
Do you think that was deliberate or incompetent?
It seems like a mistake on their part because they deleted it a few hours later. But our folks had downloaded it. And so we were able to match these anonymized, untraceable grants to real grants and figure out whether this batch of data contained the same amount of errors, the same kind of errors that the previous ones in the Wall of Receipts did. And the answer is yes. It does contain significant errors. The number one largest item on that list, a $1.75 billion savings, is wrong. The contract hasn't been canceled. And even if it had been canceled, all the money's been paid, so the savings would be zero. So that's the kind of mistake that they were obscuring when they withheld all that data.
Yeah. It's interesting. So the answer to making mistakes was not to fix the mistakes, but just to make it harder to find the mistakes.
Exactly.
I wonder if you could sort of explain to us, why do you think they still put up the receipts if they're so, you know what I mean? If there's clearly a sort of fact check issue. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, if you are aiming at impressing someone who,
Right.
who just comes to the site, it
Right.
looks like a really long list of numbers and dollar figures.
Right.
And they even set it up in a way that the default, when you look at these numbers, the first time you come to the site, is it shows you the ceiling value of the contract, like how high the contract could possibly be. And so,
Right.
and then you have to click on the each individual link to see the actual savings. And so sometimes it looks like hundreds of millions of dollars in savings is actually zero because the money's already been spent. Like it gives the impression on casual look, like A, this looks like transparency, and B, this looks
Right.
really impressive. There's a lot of things here with big numbers attached to them that look like they add up to something really impressive. And so they may think that like, yeah, people like me go through and figure out these things are wrong, but what they're aiming at is somebody who doesn't look at those fact checks and just looks at the main wall.
Right. And that is this sort of their criticism of the mainstream media is that you guys look too deeply into things and you should look more superficially because the things will be more fun. And that's why they love citizen journalists, right? Because citizen journalists may not have the skills or may not have the sort of infrastructure needed to look through code like that. I wonder when we're talking about these cuts, Elon Musk actually gets quite a lot of money from the federal. I know you'll be shocked to hear this.
Yeah, billions.
So do we know, are they doing cuts to DOD or any of the sort of places where Elon, because there is quite a big conflict of interest here.
His companies, particularly SpaceX, his space company, have huge contracts with the
Right.
Defense Department, with NASA, provides satellite. The Starlink technology provides satellite internet for government agencies. So yes, we've been looking to see, are they doing anything that takes a big chunk out of Elon Musk's federal, share of the federal spending? And I have not seen that so far. A lot of the contracts that they're claiming credit for are USAID contracts,
Right.
which is not that was not one of his big customers. They say Doge is going to the Pentagon, Doge is going to cut back at other agencies, but it may happen. But so far, we have not seen them targeting Elon Musk's own share of the federal spending.
Mostly they're targeting like money for poor children in Africa, right?
like a lot of the biggest contracts and grants they're claiming credit for saving or canceling, yes, are USAID contracts. And, people have quibbles about, or, have concerns about USAID and its mission. We shouldn't be doing that. But yes, that is the bulk of the largest items on the list
AIDS,
is,
people try to
vaccines,
keep
AIDS.
right,
It's,
vaccines, yeah.
yeah. So, and
Is
obviously we had that coverage of Musk and Rubio's fight in the cabinet meeting.
right.
There's probably new twists and turns in that story, but yes, USAID is a lot of the biggest contracts are theirs.
Which are largely humanitarian.
Yeah.
And because who needs them? Obviously, meaning to be ironic there. When it comes to the USAID stuff, during the cabinet meeting, Elon had said this thing about how he had cut the Ebola people, but then he had rehired them. Do you have any sense if any of that is based in anything that can be quantified in any way?
The things that I've read, I haven't reported on this personally, indicate that a lot of the things that they said will be turned back on at USAID, the sort of life-saving effort, have not
Right.
been, that they've
Yeah.
still been slowed down. I know there was some back and forth about whether that specific program that Musk mentioned had been turned back on, but there does not seem like the sort of original premise of the idea at USAID, which was, we're going to keep everything that's life-saving. I don't think that's really been true in a lot of cases. Those things remain closed.
David, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate what you're doing. Thank
It's
you.
great to be here. Thank you for having me on.